The Necrons are a race of ancient soulless mechanical beings in the Warhammer 40K universe. They are the oldest xenos race in existence. They were once an organic flesh and blood species, known as the Necrontyr, but a string of events led them to become quite the opposite, and here in this video we will discuss about their origins, their biology, and most importantly, their events in their ancient history. So let's get into it. The Necrontyr were a once proud species in the ancient universe, hailing from a distant corner of the galaxy millions and millions of years in the past, when the old ones were still up and about. They were a humanoid species characterized by their pale faces with elongated features, and were plagued by radiation and disease in their harsh homeworld that had a superactive star. They were characterized by their tall, gaunt bodies with elongated limbs and fingers. Their faces were angular and bony, with sunken eyes. They had pale, sickly complexions, and were prone to radiation sickness and other diseases. Okay, their origins. It is unknown as to how they actually evolved, and whether it was even possible for them to evolve naturally in a planet that is bombarded by high levels of ionizing radiation. They may be a creation of the Old Ones, just as all the other native xenos in the galaxy are. The Old Ones were the first advanced life forms in the galaxy and seeded life in millions of habitable worlds. They typically introduced single-celled organisms and watched them evolve over a long period of time. But there are a few species that they biologically engineer with a purposeful intent. So yeah, the Necrontyr, even if they evolved independently or by the Old Ones' actions, had a terrible life right from the start. Due to their star being super radioactive, they kind of developed an incurable disease that shortened their lifespans. A theory that I really like personally is that the Necrontyr were one of the first races seeded by the Old Ones, and that the Necrontyr's short lifespans were actually designed by the Old Ones to limit their future power. If the disease was warp-based, as was in the case of Fabius Bile, the Necrontyr would have been unable to cure themselves no matter how advanced their technology became. That is why the Necrontyr despised the Old Ones so much, as they forced them to live short lives and refused to remove their plague. But this isn't actual law, just a theory that floats around in the Warhammer community. But their hatred for the Old Ones only came afterwards actually. At first they were oblivious to the existence of other sentient advanced life in the galaxy. They were instead fighting amongst themselves at a point of time and even conquering other planets, creating a fledgling interstellar empire with their military might as well as, colonization. It was during one of their military campaigns that the Necrontyr first came into contact with the Old Ones, and they were in envy at the advanced tech as well as immortal lifespans of these reptilian overlords. But instead of creating a slow but gradual trade connection, well, most probably because they don't really have much time due to their short lifespans, they instead demanded and threatened the Old Ones to give them the cure to their debilitating diseases. And this really didn't work out. The inability or unwillingness of the Old Ones to give the Necrontyr, which are essentially cosmic sunscreens to help them, further enraged and created a great enmity on the side of the diseased species against the biologically immortal reptilian aliens. The Triarch, the ruling council of the Necrontyr, realized that only the threat of an external enemy would bring about the unity of their species, and saw the Old Ones as the perfect subjects for the wrath of their race. They had in fact been severely divided by infighting and ruthless politics between dynasties. This led to the first war between them and the Old Ones, with the Necrontyr being beaten back with ease by the Old Ones, which have been a species that have been running about the galaxy for billions of years. Such a war was easy to justify because the Necrontyr had always been irritated by the Old Ones' refusal to share the secrets of eternal life, or sunscreen. The Triarch also declared war on the Old Ones. At the same time, they offered amnesty to any secessionist dynasties that returned to the fold willingly. The separatist Necrontyr realms were enticed to abandon their wars of succession by the spoils of victory and promise of immortality and eternal life, and the war in heaven began. Zarek, the last of the Silent Kings and a Triarch of the Necrontyr Empire, devised a plan that would change everything forever and have ramifications that would echo through the history of the galaxy for countless millions of standard years. But the Old Ones' mastery of the webway portals and warp gates allowed them to consistently outmaneuver and beat the Necrontyr with their superior technology. The Necrontyr, on the other hand, were pushed back until they were nothing more than an annoyance. The Necrontyr's rage were tempered by the millennia of confinement on their homeworld because they lost the First War, gradually transforming into a vehement hatred of all other forms of intelligent life and an unwavering determination to avenge themselves on their seemingly invincible enemies. But in the face of defeat, the Necrontyr's ever-fragile unity began to fray once more, and the prospect of a common enemy no longer held any sway over the disparate dynasties of the Necrontyrs. It was at this time that the Necrontyr's researchers used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the galaxy's oldest dying stars after long bitter centuries of searching for some power to unleash upon the old ones. The Necrontyr discovered a sentience more ancient than any of the corporeal species in creation, including the old ones. In the complex coronas of the sun's energetic plasmas, the Necrontyr encountered the Catan, who were ancient and godlike beings that existed since the beginning of the universe. The Catan were immensely powerful and possessed the ability to manipulate reality itself. The Necrontyr were fascinated by the Catan and saw them as the key to their salvation. They believed that the Catan could help them get vindication and a long life. So these are vast beings of pure energy that spread themselves over the surface of a star, absorbing its solar energy. They eventually learned to use wings made out of electromagnetic force lines to travel to other stars to continue their consumption when their host star died eventually. Somehow, beyond all odds, the Necrontyr somehow managed to communicate with these entities. Recognizing that such diffuse minds could never perceive the material universe unless they manifested in material form, some Necrontyr actively sought the Catan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the Catan to inhabit, a type of cast made from living metal known as necrodermis. So the Catan later came to appreciate the pleasures available of beings of matter and the other realities of the corporeal life as their consciousness were now focused and they become more aware of their new mode of existence. The deliciously focused trickles of electromagnetic energy emitted by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr awoke a new hunger in the Catan, unlike the tasteless energies of the stars. The Catan were not interested in helping the Necrontyr out of altruism. They were hungry and craved new delights, especially soul energy, and saw the Necrontyr as a source of sustenance. The Catan then promised to help the Necrontyr find a cure for their condition, but only if they agreed to serve them and provide them with a constant supply of living souls. But the thing is, the Necrontyr themselves were the souls that the Catan hungered for, a fact that only a selected few of the Necron rulers actually knew and went along with, which included the Silent King. The Necrontyr, desperate for a cure and enamored by the power of the Catan, agreed to the terms. The Catan then proceeded to perform the Biotransference on the Necrontyr, which involved shattering their minds and bodies and remaking them in their own image. The Necrontyr were now transformed into the Necrons, a race of soulless, metallic warriors that served the will of the Catan like robotic slaves, and at the same time, their souls became food for the once star gods. These robotic servants now have lost their organic bodies, their ability to feel emotions, and any semblance of free will. Now, as a new race, the Necrons stood ready to renew their war against the old ones, and armed with godlike weapons and starships capable of crossing the galaxy in the blink of an eye. Bear in mind, the Necrontyr were already highly advanced but lacked in two aspects: a long lifespan and a webway in order to properly counter the old ones. Now legions of the undead living metal warriors sailed across the galaxy in their tomb ships, leaving the stars in their wake. The old one's mastery of the warp was now matched by the Catan's supremacy over the physical universe, and the Necrons, ancient enemies, suffered greatly in the ensuing interstellar slaughter. The old ones were now doomed to defeat, with the Catan and Necrons fighting as one. So with a belly full of Necrontyr's life force, the empowered Catan were nearly unstoppable, unleashing forces beyond comprehension. The old ones still had two tricks up their sleeves though. The first were the brute force fighting armies of Krogs, which were really the first generation orcs, tall as trees and each as powerful as a Primarch. The second ones were a race of Psychers, powerful ones, the Eldari, able to use the powers of the warp and even create godlike entities which were later worshipped as Eldari gods, and these beings, these gods, battled the Catan to a standstill in the other planes of existence. An ancient myth, an Eldari myth, holds that one of their laughing gods tricked the Catan known as the Outsider into turning on its brothers and to begin their long war for ascendancy. A trick that revealed that the Catan were themselves storage banks for trillions of souls, and this led to a cannibalizing frenzy amongst the star gods, eventually leaving just a few of them in existence. The psychic-enhanced servant races of the Old Ones, the Eldari, then spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necrons and their technology with the psychic power of the warp spawned sorceries. The turn of the tide was finally at hand, and the Necrons went down the slippery slope to defeat. So throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Zarek waited for a moment when the Catan would be vulnerable. Though he now had command of the entire Necron race, he still could not hope to oppose the Catan at their pinnacle of power. And even before the Catan could be held accountable for the horror they had caused, the Old Ones had to be dealt with and completely defeated. But this was kind of a paradox. And so, when the Enslaver's plague from the Immaterium devastated the Old One's population to zero, which was kind of good luck for the Silent King and the Necrons, the Silent King then rebelled against the Catan and, in their arrogance, did not realize their danger until it was too late. The Necrons channeled the unfathomable energies of the living universe into weapons so powerful that even the Star Gods were powerless to resist or defend against, and they were turned into shards which were later converted into weapons and devices for the Necrons. The Necrons had been vindicated in their long pursuit of only science and material dominance, and they had taken great pleasure in seeing the Old One's civilization crumble. The Eldari, however, had survived where the Old Ones perished, and the Necrons, weakened by their sacrifice of lives and resources in overthrowing the Catan's rule, could not stand up to them. The Eldari's power would fade over millions of Terran years, but to the Necrons, the undead living Necroderms robots, time is but another factor that they don't really experience. So the Silent King directed that the remaining Necrons cities to be transformed into massive tomb complexes threaded with stasis crypts, and that their planets be designated as tomb worlds, and he himself going into the void between galaxies to return when the time is apt for the re-emergence of the Necrons to conquer the galaxy, and this will only happen when the Eldari's rule and power have degraded. This strategy was extremely successful, with the Enslaver's plague killing off the last of the Old Ones and the Eldari's dwindling to a few pockets due to their decadence and the birth of Slanesh. So it wasn't until the Necrons were reawakened in the late 41st millennium by the forces of the Imperium of Man to once again plague the galaxy that they discovered a new and unexpected age of interstellar civilizations, waging wars similar to the one they had left behind 60 million standard years before. Waking up to see a cycle renewed, a cycle of war. So this is the history, biology and origins of the Necrons. So I hope you have enjoyed watching this video. Do hit that like button for support and subscribe, but most of all smash that bell icon for regular updates on new videos right here on this channel. Take care, boys!